So thank you so much for joining me, Gail. I wanted to start off with some introductions about where you started with publishing. Was it traditional or indie publishing, and why did you choose to go that route?
I started in traditional, and I would say I chose to go that route because I didn't think there were other options. When I was first submitting, it was in 2007. So I was familiar with indie publishing mostly as a result of being a fan of early podcaster fiction, the early podcaster fiction movement, which started in about 2006. So I knew about it, but I didn't really think it was a viable option. That was back in the days when, in science fiction, fantasy at least, self-publishing was still kind of a dirty word. So trad was the only option I was considering. It was also the only option I was considering because I wasn't considering being a full-time author.
How come you weren't considering being a full-time author? I was just curious.
I am, I guess was, I don't know at this juncture, but I was a full-time academic. So I'm an archaeologist by training, and I was about to start my PhD thesis when my first book got accepted. So I was 2 master's degrees in and almost done with a PhD when books came a-calling, I guess. So I thought I would always write, but I just assumed writing would be, a hobby, and I would have an academic career as a day job.
So at what point did you move toward hybrid publishing?
So my first book came out in 2009, and then my first book to hit the New York Times was in 2010. Yes, that's right. And then I was sort of rocketed onto a pretty rapid traditional publishing kind of schedule and relationship. So book tours, 1 book every 6 to 8 months kind of thing, which is fast for traditional publishing. And then I struck a second young adult deal off of the back of the success of my first series. And then I had a spin-off series for the adult market. So I was like pretty embroiled in traditional publishing for several years there, but I always had like self-publishing as a back burner idea because, like I said, I was involved with podcasters and sort of early pioneers of self-publishing in the science fiction and fantasy arena. So like Pip Ballantyne and T. Morris, and that contingent. So I started with some baby short stories that I had written and either had been picked up by Mariam Zimmer Bradley's Sword and Sorcerer series or hadn't been picked up and never published, just to kind of see what that was like, what the experience was like. And I want to say that would have been in 2012 or 13. I don't know the exact dates there. So just mocked up covers, really, and it was just me seeing what the experience was like more than anything with a product that I was like, it doesn't really matter if people discover this or not. But it helped me because I kind of owned my own SEO on places like Amazon super early. And this is in the days where you had to kind of hand code ebooks, like the Kindle revolution hadn't really happened yet. So, I was using Calibre and Sigil and things like that to do it. And I had to have a tech guru helper with that. One of my best friends. So
that's awesome.
To answer the actual question, I started to really think in terms of strategy from a small business pivot perspective in terms of my career in 2016 or thereabouts. And I had a 5-year plan where I wanted to pivot my entire income stream from 80-20 traditional self-published to 80-20 self-published traditional. And it took me about 3 years to do that. But I did have a whole business plan in mind for going hybrid. I was being thoughtful about it when I finally decided it was really time to do that.
What was sort of your motivation? Was it the 80-20 flip? Was that the motivation, or was it more control?
I think there's a lot of things going on. I'm not one of those super proselytizers either direction in terms of self-publishing or indie or hybrid or traditional. I really feel like it has to do a lot with your personality, your approach to business, your approach to your art as a business, your sensation of control, your desire for control over things. Although, I do argue that in self-publishing, we're just as much at the mercy of Amazon as we are at the mercy of traditional often. So it often feels like you're adrift and can't control anything either way. And also I do think it has to do with genre still. There are feel like there are certain genres that perform just better traditional, and then there are other genres that perform way better in the self-published and indie sphere. So that makes a difference also. I'm a big proponent of doing like preliminary research into your comps, your comparative titles, and like what's going on in the industry with who's publishing what and stuff like that in general before you really want to dip your toe in. That's kind of a longer discussion. So my impetus was I experienced like a lot of stuff that kind of happens as you go through the industry to all of us in traditional. It just happened to me kind of all at once, which is I got orphaned multiple times, and that means my editor, the editor that originally acquired me, left my adult publishing house. Then my young adult editor left my YA publishing house. So I was passed off to different editors. I still have the same second editor at my YA house who I love and really enjoy working with and would be happy to work with again. But my adult house kept passing me off, and there was just a lot of personnel changes. And so I just kind of felt really unshaky with my relationship from that perspective. And for those who are familiar with it, your editor, your acquiring editor, is not just your developmental editor at a publishing house. They're also kind of like your project manager and your advocate within that publishing house. So they go up to the sales team and fight, like they supervise like your cover art being created, your marketing dollars and ad spend and all that sort of stuff being run, if there is going to be any of that. And so when you lose your editor, you lose your advocate, you lose the person who like really loves your work. And so hence the like rather brutal terminology of being orphaned. So I was kind of adrift in my publishers, in my mainstay publishing house because of that feeling. I also have an extremely tight option clause in my original contract, which got grandfathered into all of my ensuing contracts, which is great for me. A tight option clause means that like they only have the right to acquire a very specific thing from me, and everything else I kind of have control over in terms of different pen names, lengths, and different subgenres. And so that allowed me to essentially write in the universe that traditional publishing had helped me create this massive sandbox and this massive platform for. And I could write without ever having to offer them the option on anything else. And that's immediately what I started to do. I started to write spin-off novellas of some of my more popular side characters. And that's to, tie into what was already out there that traditional had given me this like massive platform for, but also to like pull my fans into a relationship where they started to interact with me directly, realize that they sort of could get stuff from me directly, short stories and all that sort of thing, to really kind of build up an hybrid but indie modeled and style of relationship.
I think that's awesome that you were able to have that tight clause to be able to give your fans something sort of in between releases, or if, say the publisher didn't want more from you, you had control. That is awesome.
Yeah, and that is the result of a very tough agent in my case, and also a very tough me, because, like I said, when I originally sold my first book, I was a full-time academic, and I didn't frankly want full-time writerness the same way that a lot of other authors did. And so I was very willing to walk away from a contract because it wasn't about that for me. And in fact, I had already walked away from one contract, and I had walked away from that contract because of the option clause. So it was kind of propinquitous because I wasn't really thinking about it during that first contract being hybrid. But they knew, everybody knew, my agent, the acquiring editor, everybody at the time knew that I'd already walked from one deal because they wouldn't relax the option clause. The original option clause was too open-ended, and it would have had the rights to all of my nonfiction as well as fiction. And I was like, the publisher was like, well, we don't actually want your nonfiction. And I was like, well, put that in the option clause then, because I will not sign this. as it is, because I can't as an academic. I can't give you my white papers and like my JSTOR articles and stuff ahead of time. And I would, if I had signed that, I would have felt legally bound to do so. So you must change your option clause or I will not sign it. And they wouldn't, and so I didn't. And so when the time came to negotiate another contract, everybody at that table knew that I had already walked because of the option clause. And so if they wanted me, they had to. So I got this very tight option clause, which is pretty non-industry standard, although I recommend everybody fight as hard as they can tooth and nail for the narrowest option clause possible.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful statement about being prepared to walk, because, you know, a lot of unpublished authors that I speak to, I can even place myself in that early on in my career, like, you just want the validation, and you're sometimes afraid to say anything and to, you know, really fight against the contract.
I have to say, if a publisher is at the table and offering you a contract, you should try to train yourself emotionally to take that as the validation you need. You don't actually have to sign it. The fact that they want it is a big deal, and that's good. Like throw yourself a party, drink some champagne or some sparkling cider, whatever it is. Like, that's the big deal, because what they're telling you is that what you have written is sellable and commercial, or at least they think it is. And generally speaking, they have a reasonably good idea on the market. So that's almost more impetus to walk at that juncture, right? Like, you know it, they know it, everybody knows it. It's good, right? That's what you're being told by that offer. But yeah, the ability to turn off the validation is yeah, it's hard. It's very, very hard, of course, because like ego is involved and all of this sort of thing with your baby and your art and your book, right? But yeah, if you can develop the thick skin of knowing you have alternatives and you don't have to sign it, that is a healthy trait in an author. But I do understand that it's not easy.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. So I know we sort of dived into it a little bit, but could you, if you want to go into more specifics on what books of yours are traditional, what types of books are indie, and how do you sort of continue to go and make that decision with future books?
Sure. So the book I am best known for, I have teaching aids, is Soulless, which is this one. As this is its original publication, so as you can see, it came out in mass market, which is pretty rare these days. And it was a slow burn hit. It had a very strange path to success. It did eventually hit the New York Times, but not until later in ebook form, and it was all sort of complicated. You know how the Times is. It's complicated. And it was the first of a 5-book series. And then I had a young adult series that's a 4-book series that all hit the list. And then I had a spin-off from the Soulless Parasol Protectorate series called the Custard Protocol series. That's another 4-book series, 2 of which hit the list. And those are my traditionally published works. So that backlist still sells well. Soulless is now 12 years old. My publishing house, from the very start, I was extremely game for what at the time would be weird things like Kindle Daily Deals, etc. I mean, we're talking 2009, 2010, right? And they would come to me and be like, well, how do you feel about your ebook being all the way down at $4.99? And I'd be like, I feel great. Let's do that. You know, like, by all means, play around with my book. It was already weird. So my publisher at the time was only 2 years old in the United States. And they'd never acquired anything like this. This book is odd. It is a steampunk, urban fantasy, romance, adventure, comedy of manners mashup. They didn't know how to cover it. Then they lucked into a really good cover. They didn't know how to type it, and they lucked into really cool typology. It's a weird book. It's non-replicatable. So like, I would not take my early career as a model in any sense. It was very strange all around for everybody. Literally, bookstores, Borders were still around. Borders and Barnes & Noble didn't know where to shelve it. So they kind of end capped it, which usually you're supposed to pay for, but they didn't know it got put in horror, it got put in sci-fi fantasy, and it got put in romance. A bunch of clerks read it because it was just sort of hanging around in stacks, and so then people were hand selling it at the till in Borders and Barnes and Noble, like not just in indies. Like it was crazy. So it was this like weird slow burn success, and then Changeless hit the New York Times, and sort of everything changes for an author once that happens, so far as traditional publishing is concerned. So then I had new contract negotiations and all that sort of stuff. So those are the books that are all traditional. So 5-book series and 2 4-book series. And it's just kind of the way they were acquired, the way the contracts worked, all of that sort of thing. That's the reason they're in series, etc. I tackled the series slightly differently. So Solace is the Parasol Protector series is kind of hodgepodge. I wrote 2, then I wrote the 3rd one, and then I wrote the final 2. They all have the same main character and the same sort of dominant thread, but I didn't know at the time, so I didn't have like a concrete outline for all 5 books. The YA series I sold as a 4-book deal, and so I knew from the get-go I could write an arc. It's YA, so a slightly different approach, very different like length, style of writing, all that sort of thing. Same universe though, and same umbrella company, so different publishing houses, but they're both a Hachette. So that actually made it kind of easy to work around when I had 2 books coming out in the same year. Book tours and book planning and stuff like that. Like they're very willing to sort of work with each other under those circumstances. And then my final series was a 2-book contract, and then I didn't know if I was going to have another contract. So I wrote the first 2 of that series to stand as a completed 2-book arc. And then I picked up a different main character for the second 2 books. So a change of main character and then another change of main character. So the last 2 books kind of are standalones. Although the very final book of the Custard Protocol of that final series is written as a kind of favor to the fans. So there's a lot of check-in on characters from throughout the series. There's like a big wedding in the middle that like you get a look in on everyone's favorite character and that sort of thing, where everybody retired to, all that sort of stuff. So I did do quite a bit of sort of wrap up. So I wasn't sure. That was when I had been orphaned like for the 4th or 5th time at that publishing house, and I just wasn't sure if I would ever be writing for them again. That's how the series is worked. And then since then, I've been doing a lot of, so like I said, I have tie-in novellas. So How to Marry a Werewolf is an example of that. This is from, I take popular side characters from any of those series and then write little novellas or long novellas, so like 50,000 worders or so, like novellas by sci-fi fantasy standards rather than romance standards, and have lots of favorite characters show up, lots of tie-ins happening, but they tend to all be standalones, and that's personal preference. I really like writing standalones. It also allows me to jump around to different time periods. Since I have this huge arcing series, it goes from basically the 1840s all the way up to the turn of the century. So I can kind of just write whichever character at whatever point in time I feel like. And that's, as somebody who really likes the historical aspect of writing steampunk, that's really fun for me. So I do those. These were also an opportunity for me to explore other things like really romantic arcs or the sort of, I really like enjoying like exploring the sort of unexplored aspect of romance in particular. So one of my most recent ones, Ambush or Adore, is a long pining romance that actually spans the same time period as my entire book series. So this is a couple that met and sort of fell in love as kids in the young adult finishing school series, but then never get together until they're in their 60s. And part of that is like I just kind of wanted to explore what it's like to write a romance for an older couple, because it's a sort of neglected bracket. So I do stuff like that with my indie stuff and with my spin-offs, stuff that's sort of experimental that maybe traditional wouldn't want or doesn't really care about. And then I also got to branch off. So now I'm doing quite a bit more science fiction as well. So I wrote like a queer sci-fi cozy space mystery romance thing. Again, me and like all the genres I can fit into one book. It's called The Fifth Gender. And I just did a YA sci-fi adventure novel called Crudrat. That one just came out. And that's just because I'm not sure trad really wants sci-fi from me. But also, you know, I can just put it out there and see if people like it and people are interested in it. And that's part of it. I think the opportunity to simply let your muse go is something that indie authors, especially those of us who've focused on being as wide as possible by default or necessity, can really just kind of play with. I get to get out of my niche when I want to. All of that said, I just finished a 3-book YA space opera trilogy, which I think my agent will probably pitch to traditional publishers. So I'm not entirely against it, but I have very specific reasons for returning to traditional.
Do you want to talk about your nonfiction at all? That was self-published, right?
Now, my nonfiction was interesting because I talked to my agent about it. So one of the things they say about nonfiction, with the possible exception of like memoirs and that sort of thing, is fiction should entertain, and nonfiction should solve a problem. And so I really I like teaching. I really love doing speaking events. I really love going to conventions. I like to joke that I'm an introvert, but I perform extrovert well. I used to be a teacher as part of being an academic, and so I don't mind public speaking or anything like that. And so I've done a lot of conventions over the years and conferences. And I also have a minor in classical mythology with a focus on gender in classical mythology. And one of the things that I studied as an undergraduate was the heroine's journey as well as the hero's journey. And I just assumed that if you knew about the hero's journey, you also knew about the heroine's journey. I was wrong because I kept mentioning at cons and people all knew about Campbell and the hero's journey and didn't know that there was an alternative model. And I was like, well, this is becoming a problem. And I guess I have the solution. So I went back to my old notes and I did a ton of like research and all that sort of stuff. And I wrote this book, The Heroine's Journey. And I did talk to my agent, who does not rep nonfiction, but who basically asked around and was like, yeah, we could probably sell this to an academic press or something like that. And I was like, you know what? I just don't want to. I had to. It was really interesting because I'm very into SMART goals and being very strategic about the business side of being an author. And I had to sort of step back with the heroine's journey and be like, why am I writing this book? Like, what's my goal with this book? And I realized that the primary goal for that book was to get the information out there. Like, it did not need to, I can make my money off my fiction. I do not need to make this nonfiction a profit generator. I just want people to know about this thing. I want academics to study it. I want dry academic texts to come out about it. I want authors to realize that there's this alternative chassis out there that they can use. I want people to start to recognize this when it shows up in their pop culture and their media. It's sort of critically vilified and disenfranchised, and I would like critics to understand how misogynist they're being when they're like very anti things like romance, etc., without realizing that it ties into this storied history of an entire other model of mythology. And so, okay, if that's my goal, then I'm just doing it. I just put it out there. So, I did things like I looked at cover art and colors on covers for comp titles, and I did a cover that exactly fit into that. I priced it exactly, to fit into its niche, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a lot of work. I don't know if nonfiction is a lot of work. Like, the thing about fiction is it's just lies. Nonfiction, you have to be truthful. So I went through that whole process and got it out. It started as a keynote deck, so that was I kind of had a model in place, but it took a long time to do. And from a business perspective, it's been interesting. We can talk about that if you'd like, because it is a way to diversify your assets as a writer. But more importantly to me, it has in fact just gone out there and done its things. And, like self-help gurus have picked it up, and I don't care what you want to do with it. Go read it, take it, like activate it, start seeing it in the world around you. Does it write a diatribe against it? It doesn't matter so long as it gets out there into the zeitgeist. That was my main goal with that, and I think it has succeeded. So yeah, that's why I did the nonfiction. The nonfiction was there's a problem. I was the only one who appeared to be motivated to come up with a solution for it, so I did.
Yeah, it definitely solved the problem. I could speak personally because I always had trouble fitting my books into these specific, boxes and beats. And then I read your book and I'm like, oh, this is why. And all of my books follow the heroine's journey, maybe just by osmosis of reading books like that.
Yeah, it's a really naturally advocated. Most people, yeah.
Yeah, I just found it interesting that you named it and then explained it, and I was like, oh, mind blown. It was a great book. It was great.
Yay! That is really all I want. That's my favorite. People will come up to me, mostly at writers' conferences now, and be like, oh, and I'm like, thank you. I'm so glad I did it, because that's why I did it, to see the light turn on in people's heads. So yeah, that was my motivation for that. Although I will say it is startling. I'm very glad I self-published it, because it's so different in its behavior patterns to all of my fiction. And that's very interesting to me. I'm extremely data-driven. I'm a social scientist by training. I have a lot of stats. Excel spreadsheets are my favorite thing in the universe. Color-coded, the whole, I'm like the weird Venn diagram of a creative who also just loves spreadsheets and data. I should have been a data analyst in another life. And I only have myself to experiment with, so I do. But yeah, it sells so much more in print than any of my fiction does. And I come out of mostly selling in print as a trad author, so that's really interesting to me. Yeah, it's a very different beast than my science fiction and fantasy and romance stuff.
What also gives you opportunity to I know you tend to write a lot of genres in one book, which is awesome, and then you can just do nonfiction whenever you're feeling
Yes. And I said when I finished it, I was like, oh, this is so much work. I don't know if I'll ever do nonfiction again. And then, of course, a friend and I were discussing recently another nonfiction possibility. So we'll see.
I feel like when you caught the bug, it's like you just can't stop with nonfiction sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, I must say, yeah.
Did you want to dive into the diversification of business models and stuff like that between the fiction and nonfiction? Because I'm interested. Yeah.
Sure. Well, the big thing is how much it sells in print, the nonfiction, which I wasn't expecting, how much less it does in audio. That might be because mine is particularly short as an audio. I understand audio nonfiction consumers really like a long number of hours to stick their teeth into if they're going to use their chips on it. So those are just two interesting differences between fiction and nonfiction. But I am a huge diversification person in terms of all the different things that you can do, especially as an indie, with your assets, which is what your books are. So I do audio of all of my books. Sometimes it takes a little time. I do print of all of my books. I also have an arrangement with a small press named Subterranean, and we do high-end limited runs, so 700 to 1,000 book runs that are beautiful, leather-bound or cloth-bound, inlaid omnibuses or collections of some of the novellas that I've written in the Parasolverse, in the Soulless universe. So I do that, the luxury, which is basically the luxury scarcity model. Turns out I have readers and fans who are really collecting pretty books too. Shocking when you write steampunk. So I do that. I also have a graphic novel adaptation of one of my books, so I've dealt with graphic rights, and then I have had several film deals over the years as well. There's been an illustrated edition of my first book. So I really like that kind of thing. I'm thinking about other sorts of recipe tie-in books or crafting tie-in books or coloring books or that sort of stuff as well. And then I also have merch. So I have a jewelry deal with a merch vendor. And then I also have t-shirts and all that sort of stuff as well. So, and I also do a lot of direct sales. So yeah, I'm pretty much diversified at this juncture.
I love that. You just really just take it to that, and that's great because authors sometimes just think of a book and then the next book, but they don't really go back to that first thing that they created and sort of open it up to different formats and everything.
An early friend of mine once described the comment model for thinking about yourself as a as a independent creative, whether it's writing or art or whatever it is, which is the new release is like the flaming head of the comet, right? Like it's a big thing that is glowing through the sky, but really most of your profit and everything and most of your career as an author comes from that long tail of the comet, which is your backlist and all of these different like additions you can do, diversifications you can do, all of those sorts of things. And so as much as I will always be writing new stuff, the fact of the matter is that new stuff is actually pulling the long tail of all your old stuff. So every time you have a new release, it's actually an opportunity to onboard new readers to the rest of your world, to the rest of your universe, to other things that you've written. And so I'm really, like, I think about that constantly all the time. You know, and I'm one of those, I'm like right now I'm thinking about doing some new covers on some of my books. And I do a lot of things like I do blog posts that have deleted scenes for old books, and I'll repost and talk about that stuff all the time. And I do a lot of, since I do so much research for my historical stuff, I have like extras for the different books and that sort of thing. So I'm always trying to think of things that, like, as a voracious reader or a huge fan of a particular author or a particular universe, I would want from that author. And that's what I constantly try to give, like, both in my newsletter and in my blog and on social media and stuff like that.
That's awesome. I kind of wanted to stick with the backlist. I know it's like a further question, but how do you specifically capitalize on your backlist when it comes to constantly promoting it through your newer works or anything like that?
So, like I said, I do a lot of blog posts that have, there's a lot of stuff. So I have about 30 books now, so I have a lot of backlist to play with. So, it's very helpful. Also, I should say I'm wide as an author, which means I'm on all different platforms, not just Amazon, and I'm not ever KU or anything like that. I just don't participate in those ecosystems. I think my fans would be more angry with me if I did that kind of thing than not. What I do is I have a lot of perennial content. So if I'm not a lot of authors blog anymore, but I still do, but I only blog perennial now. So a good example is I have a blog post that hasn't gone live yet, which is all about my tea habits. Now, this kind of has nothing to do with my books, except it really does. But I'm known to be a huge fan of tea. For those of you who are watching this, I have been drinking tea during the first half of our conversation. I love it. I drink it all the time. It's genuinely something I adore. It is in all of my books, even the science fiction books, because I assume everyone will always drink tea. So I have been working on this sort of epic blog post, which is all of my favorite tea, all of what I use to make tea, all of my kettles and teapots and stuff like that, which at the outside might not look like it's really gonna drive book sales. But in it, I talk about where tea shows up in all of my different books. And also, it is very Pinterest happy. Pinterest is one of my biggest redirect generators to my website. And so it has lots of cool tea images. And so those will all be pinned. And I will probably get like backlist sales off of the strength of a lot of those images and things like that. So that's kind of how I do it. I have a lot of quote memes I'm very quotable as an author because I'm a comedy author, so I tend to have a lot of fun one-liners. So I use those to fill in content on all of social media all of the time, and those quotes can be from lots of different books. Every year when it's Solas's birthday on the 1st of October, we being the fan group and everybody, we all do a little like, tell us the story of how you discovered the book, that kind of thing. My publisher still activates first in series sales on both of my major series, so both the young adult and Solas, and occasionally the Custard Protocol as well. And so like I am always a huge advocate of that. So I always like spend a lot of newsletter and social media bandwidth to drive my fans who have probably all read those books to recommend those books when they're on sale, so people will pick them up and start the series. even though it's trad, like I'm not gonna ignore it and not promote something just because it's trad. I know some authors get kind of bitter at their trad series because they're kind of sacrificed. I've gotten to the point where I'm still collecting royalties on books that are 12 years old, much to the shock of everybody involved. And it's partly because I do this all the time. And I also am like, well, I still get royalties, but they're still kind of like lost leaders for my indie stuff in a way. But that's okay because I still get royalties and they're still in the zeitgeist, and my traditional publisher is still promoting them occasionally, which is great. And that's partly because I keep writing in the same universe as well, I think. So every new indie project I have that's in the same universe pushes the series back up to the top of algorithms and stuff. So it's just all, like, I just never forget all 30 of the books, right? Like, and sometimes we'll drift in and out. So, you know, I'll activate backlist when I'm going to have a new one coming out in that same universe, right? I have 3 universes now. I'll put something, if it's mine, if I own it, like the San Andreas Shifters, which is my urban fantasy series, then I'll put the first book on sale myself, some things like that.
Yeah, you're in that unique position of working together with your trad publisher where, like you said, a lot of authors may like not do anything with their trad because maybe they can't write, you know, in that series anymore due to the option or anything, or they just maybe are hoping for rights reversion or anything like that. But
yeah, they kind of want it. They want it to sort of disappear out of the zeitgeist, so it'll go OP, out of print, so that they can get the rights back, which I get. But I have had to accept that, like, I guess sadly, that first series in particular of mine is so popular, it's unlikely to ever go OP at this juncture, which is great. But also, like, okay, I'm never going to control the assets for that series, so I am better served using that series to spearhead other works when I can and as I can. So please keep buying it, everybody. but yeah, I'm very pragmatic and practical about my books. I think that's like just my attitude. I used to sell. I'm a potter as well, so I used to sell my pottery, and I'm used to just being like, okay, the pot, the art, the sculpture that I have made has been sold. I don't know what those people are going to do with it. Like, so I just got to let it go and make the next one. And I think that was a pretty good training for me with books.
Yeah, so we sort of discussed that you have an agent and you had one that fought for you on the first contracts. Is that a current agent or do you have a different one?
Yeah, I'm one of those very lucky authors who has had the same agent their whole career and a great relationship with that agent. So if I had to pick, I'll take the agent. She's great. And she has been all along. She represents a lot of very big self-published authors like Hugh Howey, and so she knows what the self-publishing thing is like. And so, you know, she's there to sell foreign rights if I want on my self-published stuff. So she's never, we've had a healthy, fantastic working relationship our entire 12, almost maybe 13 or 14 years now. It's my longest relationship.
That's so awesome to have such an advocate for your books and everything. And I was just, I know we discussed it a little bit, but in terms of like how she factors into like your indie books, I mean, is there always a conversation about every book, or do you sort of go to her whenever you want? Yeah,
it's very, like, both of us have a really good sense now on what is likely to, hers is better than mine. But if I don't want to even consider a trad, which like with the novellas or short stories, obviously, or the sort of standalone spin-offs, I usually am not interested in considering that. I will just tell her it's going to happen. So I'll just be like, it's this universe, it's this book, pass along the information. If it's an adult book set within the Parasol verse, that information technically also gets passed along to my publishing house because it isn't their universe, but they have stuff in that universe. So if they would like to know why they suddenly get a spike in sales of the backlist because a new one has come out, they usually don't really care that much, but I feel like professionally wise, like we inform them. So I tell my agent anytime I have something new coming out that's like novella length or longer, like the short story she doesn't care about. And partly that's because she just puts them on the roster in case a foreign publisher is interested in translation rights, or a film agency is interested in film rights, or graphic, or any of the other stuff that could happen with a book. Because I will just, if someone pings me, I will just redirect them to her under those circumstances. So it just helps if she knows what all of my IP is, basically. IP, my intellectual property. So she always gets told. But occasionally I will be writing something crazy, which is what just happened with this trilogy, this sci-fi trilogy. And I'll be like, well, maybe. Like, it's very contemporary in its subject matter, even though I know from keeping an eye on the industry that it's not, that YA space opera is not a big market right now, if ever. So I'll mention it to her when I'm like, she's out of Denver, so I get to Denver pretty regularly for various other reasons. It's a huge writer community there. And, we usually have dinner together once a year or so, get caught up. And so, I'll just mention it to her, whatever I'm working on, because she always asks, right? She's an agent, I'm an author. What else do we talk about what we're writing? And in this particular instance, she was like, yeah, I think we should see if a YA house wants this one. So I sent it to her under those circumstances. And in this particular instance, I find YA much more difficult to crack as an indie. Partly because schools and libraries are involved with that genre. Also, I think it is film worthy, this particular series, or at least animation worthy. And my current film agent actually specializes in animation, so if it gets picked up and it is successful, it would make a great animation. So that is something that I consider when I'm going to trad or not as well. Also, it's all written. So I can push my traditional publisher to release it relatively rapidly for them, fingers crossed, which I think is better in general if you can get a series out relatively quickly. So, there's a bunch of things that are under consideration when I decide to talk to her about maybe representation. That's assuming when she finishes it, still wants to pitch it. She might be like, no, this isn't good enough. And then I'll just be like, that's fine. Because that's just, it's not commercial enough to be profitable enough for a large publishing house. It's still probably going to do well for me, right? And it's done, yeah. That's really rare for me. I don't think since I became a full-time writer, I've ever done that. In fact, no, I've never done that because you need time. I'm not a particularly fast writer, so I needed an entire year to write 3 books in a row. That's just as fast as I can do. And, but the idea of writing a series from start to finish, where as I'm writing the last book, I could go and put foreshadows into the first book and like really make everything sync up and really explore one clean concept over all 3 books. Like, oh, it's so appealing to me because I've never had that in my traditional life. Writing series is the first book has always been out as I'm writing the second one even, or definitely the third one. And I can't go change it. It's on the shelf. So frustrating. So that was just super appealing to me. So that was part of it. Part of it was I was just really inspired by the concept, and I knew it was like a real clean trilogy. Like I knew it was going to suit 3 books really, really well. So yeah, that was it. But also it was literally the only thing I felt like writing. So like many people during the last couple of years, many artists, like I experienced a huge slump where I just didn't want to write at all, kind of like a creative depression. And I wrote one dark kind of cerebral exploratory piece, which no one sees except my newsletter because it's not me, it's different, but it is in one of my popular universes, so I put it out to the newsletter. It's a little short piece. And then after that, like the brain was just like, we don't. And then the brain was like, oh, we want to leave Earth entirely. That's what we want to do. And explore the nature of entertainment and art in space. And I was like, oh, do we, brain? Okay, let's do that. And that's what I wanted to write. And I was like, well, having not written for about a year, I was like, anything to get myself to write. Anything. It doesn't matter. And if this is what we want to write, we write it. So that's what I wrote. It'll like I've been promising, like my super fans on my newsletter all know this has been going on and are chittery and excited about it. And I'm like, don't worry, no matter what, it will come out. It has to come out. I love this trilogy so much that like it will see the light of day. Don't worry about it.
So in your opinion, have you, what are like the biggest benefits for you for being a hybrid author?
I love it. I don't want to proselytize, but it really suits my personality really, really well. Everything about the hybrid model in particular, like being able to work with a traditional publisher and being able to also do my own stuff. I'm a control freak. Like I said, I love spreadsheets. I'm super, super organized. I really enjoy and like the sales and marketing and business side of the publishing industry in general. Like I'd probably be something like data analytic for a publisher or promotional service or something like that if I weren't a writer. Like I just love it. It's really fun for me. Like I listen to all of the author business podcasts for fun, even though a lot of them are geared towards newer authors. I still like to know what the young people are doing. I'm always going to jump on the new platform, whatever it is. I might not stay. I might back away real quickly like I did with TikTok, but like I'm going to give it a try just to see. So yeah, I just like it. It really suits my personality. And that's the flop ability. That's the like, well, if Trad doesn't want it, I can do it myself. Or even if I don't want to sell it to Trad, like with the nonfiction, I can do it myself. And then I get all the data and I'm just very excited about all of that. Yeah, I love the versatility of it. I like that because I'm in control, I can do these sort of other deals like the graphic novel deal or the deal with Subterranean for the super high-end leather-bound versions that give people exactly what they want in terms of like a collector's item or what have you. It really works for me. And I'm in a very fortunate position to, have enough of a fan base to activate that. But yeah, it really suits me as from a personality perspective, I think. Also, like, the dark side, of course, is that you always get frustrated. Like Amazon does something like decide to like copyright infringe you on yourself or whatever. And I'm like, oh, but I maybe have a trad book coming out, or I maybe have a special edition coming out, or some weird new piece of merchandise or something. So like it allows the like stress to not be too much of a stress because all of my eggs are not in one basket. The other thing about the nimbleness of it is I've started to take every upset as like an excuse to try to experiment with something different. And I'll give you an example. There was a while ago, Amazon Audio, so ACX or Audible, was just taking forever to upload new audiobooks. And I had an audiobook in the queue, and it was for a recent release. And everybody was very excited about it and kept asking me where it was because it was taking months. Like for some people, it took about half a year. In my case, I think it took about 3 months to get through. And it was just Amazon ACX hiccup. These happen. They happen all the time. And I was like, well, I'm frustrated. My readers are frustrated. The audiobook listeners want it. They're frustrated. I'm like, how do I pivot this situation? And I was like, well, the ACX contract is exclusive, but only when it's for sale. And it's not for sale. So what I did is I basically said to my newsletter, you can buy this audiobook directly from me in MP3 format. So you own the assets. You will have it on your computer. Amazon can never take it away from you. It isn't rented or chipped or anything. You will own it. Until Amazon gets it uploaded. There's an amorphous end date going on, but it will be available for direct purchase until that moment. And the moment it's live on Amazon, it will no longer be live on my website, but until then, you can buy it yourself. And that gave my newsletter something exclusive that they were excited about. It gave me something I could direct the people sending me angry emails about why it wasn't available to. I could be like, well, if you're on my newsletter, you can get it directly. And I now do that with all of my audiobooks. It was so successful and people were so excited about it that now at least 2 weeks before an audiobook goes live, you can buy it from me directly. And frankly, a lot of my audiobook listeners are both buying the MP3 to own the asset and listening to it on Audible because they like the Audible interface. And they're like, well, I'll just use a chip to listen to it anyway, but I still own it because it's mine, right? And that also surprised me. Like an enthusiastic reader, an enthusiastic fan will often buy multiple different versions of the same book. Like training my brain to be that way. I used to be one of those people who would just like flames coming out the side of my head. It's like every time Amazon did something or anytime my traditional publisher did something to annoy me. And now I'm like, how is this an opportunity? Like, what can I do? And I did the same thing recently when, we're still having supply chain problems with print editions. And like my brain is like, how do I convince people to try an ebook for a change? Those sorts of things.
I love that. I love your fans. They sound great.
They're great. I love them to death. I used to do a lot of like world cons and like, big sci-fi conventions, and I can you'd walk up to the line, there'd be lines for a bunch of different authors, and like, my line. Like, there is no doubt when it's my fans. They're always chatting to each other. They're usually very, very well dressed. And I was like, oh, that's my line. Hi. They're great.
On the flip side of that, have you found any sort of pitfalls or disadvantages of being a hybrid author?
Yes, definitely. So this thing with copyright can often be a problem. If you are hybrid, especially if you're coming out of trad, going into self-publishing, you have to file for copyright. I would say, there's no absolutes. You don't have to if you don't want to, of course, but I would highly recommend filing for copyright on everything you can. So novella length and longer, the moment a book comes out, just because your name is sort of registered in all these other different parts of the systems, whether it's Barnes & Noble or Amazon or Kobo or whatever. And so they're like, wait, who is Gail Carriger? Why is she showing up like for Hachette, but also for herself, but also blah, blah, blah. And they just flag you up much more often, which means your book will get taken down from sale, and you have to prove that you have your copyright. And technically you have your copyright whether you have filed it with the Copyright Office or not, but that piece of paper from the Copyright Office is very useful. So that's one of the things I recommend for hybrid authors in particular, is making sure you file for your copyright with the Copyright Office. And it's a pain and it takes forever, but it's worth it. I would never do a split distribution on English language again. So the last 2 books of my traditionally published series, the Custard Protocol series, they were published by the U.S. for North American, so that's Canada, the United States, etc., associated territories. But my UK publisher gave me such a lowball offer on the advance that I was like, actually, no, I will just self-publish these without you. But it is real hard to do a territory restriction on a self-published from America to, say, what I was trying to do, which is UK, New Zealand, and Australia and associated territories. So the second half of English language territories. That is just a minefield and a mess, and nobody's used to it. So like, technically the systems are in place for in Amazon and Drafted Digital and Smashwords and places like that, but really they don't get it. So, and you have to do your own covers and like all those sorts of things, which is fine. People are used to different covers for UK editions. But yeah, that was a nightmare I kind of never want to repeat. So for me, at least, it's a book. The whole book is either traditional or self-published. I don't think I'll ever gonna split, like have a hybrid book again. It was just too much of a nightmare, and perhaps things have changed, but I don't think so. That's a really rare situation statistically, and so I just think not a lot of authors. So that's something I would encourage you to think about as a hybrid author, is like the whole book is going to go one way or the other. It's just going to be a lot easier on you, a lot less frustrating. Another thing is the challenges in print are really extreme right now. I've taken the time to train my consumers, so my reader base over the past 3 to 5 years, that the print editions in and of themselves are luxury goods. So I've been very open that it is incredibly frustrating to deal with Ingram. It's really, really frustrating to deal with the print side of the publishing industry as an independent author, much more expensive and much more frustrating than as a traditionally published author. And so I have sort of trained them to think of print books themselves as a luxury item, to be like, you might have to wait for it. The digital edition might come first. If you don't buy enough of the digital edition, you might never get a print edition. That kind of thing. And just setting a different expectation cap, that it's not going to drop on the same day. I will try, but that's not always the case. That it is more expensive when it's print on demand, because that's just the way the wholesale and book industry works. And that it is a favor I am doing to them. And I have talked about, the tantrums and days of writing that I lose trying to upload the print editions and stuff, so that they realize it is really a hassle. So that's been a slow process, but they're coming around to that, because most of my super fans, at least, come out of trad, and so they have different sets of expectations. But so that they've kind of been on this self-publishing journey with me, and now they all kind of know what's going on. And so now if someone in the fan group is like, "Where's the print edition?" Like, the fans are like, "Gail's trying, we promise. Just takes a little while. You might have to wait, Or, "Why is the cover different in the UK? That's because Gail did that one." Da 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 da. That kind of thing.
I love that. I love how they stuck up for you, like always.
Yes, it's great. I feel like I have a little team of advocates out there.
Yeah. Is the copyright issue specifically, is that more Amazon that you've had more issues with, or is it?
I've only had to file them with Amazon. I never deal directly with Barnes & Noble for various reasons. Apple is a stickler mostly about links. That's where they will get uppity. So different platforms have different things that they object to, and so you just kind of have to play the game with the different platforms. But yeah, most of my problems were Amazon, and that seems to have been sorted, partly because I now am very good about filing copyrights, but also because I have an IP lawyer, or he's an entertainment lawyer, but he knows how to handle IP. And so if necessary, I can get him to draw me up some quick official sounding paperwork. So I can then file that with Amazon. Sometimes you're just never sure what makes the problem go away. It just eventually goes away. I'm like, okay, I don't know which thing I threw at this problem to make it leave, but finally something worked. I'm fortunate in that I've never had an extreme, all of my indie books go down on Amazon or anything like that. It's always just been, we object to this one, and I've been like, okay, or this one's being pirated. I do have near constant DRM issues. That is another advantage of being traditionally published, I will say, which some of the self-published advocates don't talk about a lot, which is before I had a film deal and got an entertainment lawyer, I had a team of lawyers from my traditional publishing house at my back. So I have, as a steampunk author, I have a lot of, they don't do it intentionally, I must say, but there's a lot of IP infringement, particularly in the arena of trademarks. So people will make, jewelry and then brand it the Parasol Protectorate, which you can't do. So I have to, do trademark, and it's a trademark thing. It's not a copyright thing. Not a lawyer, not an expert, yada, yada, yada. All I know is that I have to protect it, and I have to be please don't do that. You can say inspired by the characters of Gail Carriger's universe or whatever, but you can't actually brand your stuff with my universe, because then it's associated with me, and I don't have quality controls in place, and all this other stuff happens, right? So it's just a mess. But prior to that, having a film deal, I did have all of my traditionally published lawyers just dealing with that. And they deal with all of the takedown notifications for piracy and all that sort of stuff. And that's still the case. So if all of my stuff shows up on a new pirate site or whatever, I go file with my publishing house for all of the traditionally published stuff. And they have a team, they have a system in place that just deals with that. And usually it means all of my indie published stuff is also taken down at the same time, right? So it's much yeah, it's just kind of nice to know that there's a big company with a lot of lawyers at my back. So yeah, that is like kind of one of the side effects of being hybrid, is there's this sort of carryover attachment to my name that is associated with the larger publishing house. And it lends sort of credence, power, and authenticity when some of these necessary evils of the digital age come into play.
So you in particular, as a hybrid author, have you made any mistakes that, learned from since then and, want to tell other authors about so they don't make them?
So many mistakes. Well, that one I talked about already, with the one where I decided to do the UK edition myself. That was a mistake, I would say. Plenty of mistakes in terms of like books that had typos in them, but then my trad books have had those mistakes as well. I mean, one of my trad books went to print with a typo on the spine, like the full first print run of that book. All 10,000 copies or whatever had a misprint on the cover. Everything has gone wrong. Yeah, I mean, I would urge everybody to be as meticulous as possible in terms of editing, copy editing, proof editing, beta editing, all of the editing. Make sure it's as tidy as possible. I mean, again, coming out of traditional publishing in particular, there are expectations in place in terms of quality. So like making sure, if you're writing in the same universe like I do, if you have a shared brand, that like the cover art is like seamless in terms of it looks like it belongs in the same universe, to the same author, like all of that, like paying attention to all of those sorts of things. I mean, that's the way, if you come out of trad, that you are really lucky, is like, you can't be completely derivative, you can't copy it, but you can certainly take your like cover art and layout, for example, as a template. So I kind of like really like the way the typology is laid out on my YA books in the UK in particular. And so that's what I handed to my first cover art designer. I was like, I just like the way it looks on the back cover of these particular books. So like for all of my indie stuff that's in this universe, let's use that style on the back cover. That sort of a thing. Because I have it, like I have the sort of template. That's how I've avoided making mistakes, I guess I would say, is like the recognizing that there is stuff that traditional publishing does do well, and in my case has done well for me. I mean, my covers on my first series made that series. That's like, people picked up my first book because of its cover. So it behooves me to pay attention to the elements that were done correctly with that cover, as dated as it now is. And so, that paying attention to like really what's going on in terms of comparative titles, like trends in the industry, staying really like, if you want this to be your career, that means it's your job, and therefore like treat it like it's a job, which means staying in touch with what's going on in trends, not just in like content, not just what's popular in terms of what people are reading, but what's popular in terms of the visuals, the cover art, the uploading, platforms, distribution, all of that sort of thing. I belong to quite a few like mastermind groups. Like I said, I listen to podcasts. I try and stay in touch with like what's going on in the industry as much as possible. To try to avoid pitfalls, but I still encounter pitfalls. Like, yeah, I mean, I think everything is an opportunity for success and an opportunity for a terrible mistake. And I've certainly made more than my fair share of terrible mistakes. It's training my brain to like allow it to freak out for a day or whatever, and then to figure out what is required to make up for that mistake. And sometimes it's just an abject apology. Like one of my most recent book, Crud Rat, which is the sci-fi YA adventure story. It went to press in its digital form with a bunch of spelling mistakes in it. And like, I have no idea how it happened. I uploaded the wrong version, whatever, and I was like, well, poop, like that happened. And a couple of fans just noticed it, and one of them just took it upon herself to like find all the errors for me, and send them all to me. And I was like, what can I send you? Like, what can I give you as a thank you? You know, so I sent her a book as a thank you, you know, one of the Subterranean special editions. And I was like, would you like to belong to my beta reading group? You know, like, can I absorb you into the fold? And I immediately corrected it, but it was about 2 weeks. So there's a bunch of people who, you know, have the edition with the mistakes in it. But then I just fessed up. I just like told my newsletter. I was like, I'm sorry, you guys, like mistakes happen. This was all on me. I did something wrong. I still don't know what it was. You can re-upload the book and it will be fixed, or you can read it with all of my weird writer tics in it. Should we talk about what that means? Like, let me explain writer tics. Here's some of mine. Bellow, below. Oh, always confuse those two words. I just like a double L. I think it looks better. You know, that kind of thing. And then I just fessed up to it. And I was like, if you want to keep it with the spelling mistakes, then lucky you, you have a first edition, you know? Otherwise it's fixed. But that's one of the things I've learned is just to admit it, especially on my newsletter, and just be like, sorry, everybody. But then when somebody is, like I said, again, when somebody's public in the group and is like, oh my God, there are spelling mistakes in this book, all the fans who got the newsletter 3 days ago will be like, guess what? Gail made a mistake. You know? So yeah, that's another way to deal with it, is just to own up to them and be like, oh, I was a dumbass. I shouldn't have done that. It is. And I do have, I do outsource to, I do have contract workers for a lot of stuff. I don't do my own covers. I hire for that. I hire for developmental edit, and I hire for a copy edit. I did not hire for a proof edit, which probably should have, but mistake probably still would have happened. I just uploaded an older draft, I think. I do, that's another thing. I very much encourage hybrid authors, but self-published authors to really consider about getting a team in place and recognizing that you might be able to do it, but it's maybe better for you to outsource it. And the way I put it is like, I know I can change the oil in my car, but I'm not going to learn how to do that. I'm just going to take it to an oil changer. And I'm like that about like book covers and stuff like that. Like, I'm just like, yeah, but there are people whose job it is to do that. And like, I'm always better off writing the next book. Like, anything I can outsource so that I'm actually writing fresh words is going to be a better use of my time.
Yeah, I think the background in trad sort of gives us the opportunity to know like our first drafts and like what it turns out to be. When you have to do that all on your own, you're like, oh no, I definitely need to hire someone because I don't know how to get from point A to point B without my developmental editor or copy. Like, I love copy editors.
Love copy edit. I cannot copy edit my own stuff. I could never do that kind of thing. And I recognize that there are authors out there that can't, but I'm not one of those. And people are startled that I still do a dev edit, but I just like it. I've always been one of those authors who really likes to be edited, though. I like the red pen on the page. It makes me feel like it plays into my perfectionist tendencies, that it's getting tidier and neater and better each time around. I don't feel like it's a criticism. I feel like it's a team work to make a better product at the other end. So, yeah, I'm a weirdo who likes the edit.
I do as well. That's really validating to hear that, because I know a lot of indies like, oh, just use your betas and stuff. I'm like, I don't trust them. I want a real editor.
I also have a team. I have a team of betas as well, because I write so many books in the same universe that continuity is really a problem. So I have a team of beta readers who reread all of my books regularly, who are just super fans, and who at some time or another probably caught me out on something like eye color had changed between books or some minor detail like that. And I was basically like, you seem like a very careful in-world continuity. Would you like to be a beta reader? And they're truly invaluable, because that's something that any editor, whether it's a developmental editor I hire or an acquiring editor at a publishing house, is just not going to catch those fixes. But superfans always will if you're writing in a lot of books in the same universe. So yeah, I have an invaluable beta team, and some of them also catch typos, but I actually but my copy edit, line edit, typo team is really, really good. I have a whole bunch of them that I use for different, like I have somebody who handles the historicals because she's really good on historical continuity. Yeah. I have a real comma issue. Does not know where the comma goes. Just vomits commas. So someone has to come in and take them out.
Yeah, that's why we let them do it.
I like a comma, apparently. I'm learning, but I'm never going to know exactly where they're supposed to be.
We discussed this a little bit in terms of marketing, but do you have any other tips you want to discuss about how you market your trad versus indie, or them coming together? We sort of discussed that. Any more tips for that?
Like I said, I pay attention to what's kind of going on, so I have kind of dabbled in all the different advertising spheres as well for experimental purposes. I will say it's really important for authors to understand, I know, but like how statistical analysis and data analysis works. You have to have a baseline. I think you should know what your organic sales and your organic reach is before you start an advertising campaign. So that means gathering data on yourself and your like daily sales and things like that for a couple of months before you start an advertising campaign on a book or get a book pub or any of those things. Otherwise, you don't know if you're being smart with your money, if you're spending your money wisely. So that's like my biggest tip from that perspective is just make sure you have a baseline. So, and I've done stuff, but this, it changes so fast and there's always new things in the advertising world, but I've done BookBub, I've done both, featured deals and ads. The featured deals were ones that my traditional publisher got for me, but I still kind of tried to gather as much data as possible. I always do pre-order campaigns because they're immediately trackable via Amazon, at least. So that's, in other words, you can track every pre-order that happens the day after it occurs. So if you do something like a social media blast, you can see an immediate effect for that. So I've done I do tend to do long pre-orders again because I come out of trad. So I'll do these long pre-order windows, a month, 2 months or whatever, and then track everything. So when Amazon sends out the email to my followers, what kind of bump do I get in pre-orders? When BookPub sends that email out, what kind of bump do I get in pre-orders? When I do a social media blast, when I change the banners on my social media, when it's Twitter, when it's Facebook, when it's Pinterest, when blah, 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 blah. So I like to stage all of that. And of course you can't, every book is different. There's always trickle over and stuff like that. But like, I find that kind of data very interesting, and I recommend kind of knowing that. It's all very well to be like, I have 30,000 Twitter followers, but if they click but don't convert, it doesn't really matter in terms of like wasting time on that platform trying to shill your new book. So, I do a lot of that sort of stuff, but I have also run Facebook ad campaigns, Amazon ad campaigns, tried various different platforms. I'm on YouTube and places like that as well. The other big tip I would give is use a redirect to track everything. So you can at least track your clicks effectiveness wise. So you can use, if you have a WordPress website, you can use the plugin called redirection. And so everything I link when I'm linking to a book has a redirect so that I can track where the eyeball came from. And so is it in the back matter of the book? That's one tracking code. Is it a sign up for my newsletter in the front matter of the book? That's a different tracking code. Is it a image in a blog post? That's one tracking code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that just allows me to kind of know where the eyeballs are of the people who are interacting with me in terms of actual fans of the books who want to know when there is a new book, like where are they coming from? Where are they located on the internet? And that just allows me to like be very strategic in how I spend what little free time I have in terms of social media and places like that. So, and I know that's rather complicated and probably a bit overwhelming, but I would set that kind of thing up first as much as possible. And like the big piece of advice that like everybody gives, and if you're not taking this, then don't be an author, quite frankly, is have a newsletter. Like, please have a newsletter. Like I still get traditionally published authors like older than me sidling up to me at a bar con and being like, so this newsletter thing, and I just want to burst into tears. my single biggest regret, if we talk about mistakes, is that I didn't take a piece of paper newsletter sign-up sheet with me when I was book touring early on in my career as an author. We didn't have any of this back then in terms of like authors sharing experiences, the indie author movement, all of that sort of stuff. I didn't even know to do it, but I should have. Boy, should I. So that's like take a physical newsletter sign-up sheet with you if you're going to conventions or conferences or doing signings in bookstores, and otherwise like get people onto a newsletter, do a newsletter once a month, even if it's just a short little pithy thing. That is the number one piece of advice, and I know everybody listening has been told this 1,000 times, but it is so important. I can't emphasize how important it is.
Yeah, well, especially with that recent, when Facebook went down and all that, like, you can't predict any of this.
You can't. And if you're relying on a middleman or a third party, and I understand that a newsletter is relying on MailerLite or whoever you're using, and redirection is relying on your own website, but if my website goes down, I got other problems, let me just say. But it is the only eyeballs you really own out there. And you can download a CVS with all of your emails on it and everything. So like you do have it all, and you should have an archive of it. And it's just, yeah, like you said, like Facebook can and will freeze your account, ban you, lock you out, knock you down, just delete your page. Amazon will do exactly, stick you in a dungeon, delete all of your books all of a sudden. We've all been through it. We've all watched other people go through it. So relying on TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is, as your mainstay driver to people buying your books or going to your website will burn you eventually. Like there's no other way around it. The newsletter is really your safest bet.
What is one misconception or myth, in your opinion, that you wish other authors knew about being a hybrid author that you want to debunk?
A lot of people don't seem to kind of know what hybrid author is or means, or they have a different interpretation of it than I do, which is fair. Like hybrid is one of those terms that gets thrown. I was thinking should advocate for chimera author instead, because hybrid seems to be a term that's bandied about a lot in a lot of different ways these days. I haven't really encountered it, if there are myths. I guess the biggest one is that there's more control when you're self-published, which to a certain extent there is, but also that can really work against you. What I'm fond of saying is like, have you seen the way authors dress? I don't think they should be in charge of their own cover art most of the time. I think that's a terrible idea. So yeah, like please, a lot of authors don't do your own covers. I know you like the idea of that control, but your taste is terrible. And that's because it's like the label on a shampoo bottle. What the cover is doing for your book is alienating the wrong readers and finding the right readers. It most of the time has nothing to do with what's inside the book. It has to do with finding your readers. It's a symbol of your book. It's not it's the ad. It's the first ad for your book is your cover. And a lot of authors can't separate themselves enough from their babies to put the correct cover onto that baby. So anyway, so yes, I guess the big one for me is that be careful of the control that you think you have when you're self-published. Be aware of the complete lack of control that you have when you're traditionally published. But also understand that a lot of the control you have as a self-publisher is kind of a myth. Because there's a lot of big corporations that you are working with whose business it is to make money off of your IP, just the way Trad's business is to make money off of your IP, and none of them are on your side. Amazon's not on your side. Traditional publishing most of the time also not on your side, and that's because it's their business to make money off of you. They're just doing their jobs. So the only person you have genuinely advocating for yourself in this dynamic at all is you as an author. which I guess brings me to like that one piece of advice that I feel like is very important, which is educate yourself as much as possible, podcast, blogs, whatever it is. Also have friends who are other authors. Try to have friends who are other authors who are a little further ahead of you in their careers and at the same level as you in their careers wise. You need people to talk to about the business side of this. You need people to compare contract terms with. You need, if it's a Facebook group, whatever it is, you need a place where you can go when Amazon puts you in the dungeon and you're freaking out and you can be like, how do I get out of this situation? The only way like we have a resource and protect ourselves is with fellow authors. So that would be my big one, I guess. Find yourself fellow authors.
Yeah, community is definitely key. And that's something that I feel like I got a lot more of when it came to moving toward indie. Like, I feel like the indie community is very open to sharing new things, maybe because we have more control over these new things and we can do them versus being a little stuck with trad.
Maybe. I mean, partly I think because I come out of the sci-fi fantasy world and because I've always been a big geeky con girl, like even well before I was an author, I was cosplayer, I used to go to cons all the time. A lot of my closest friends are trad published authors who I met early days on in my career. I mean, one of my best friends in the entire publishing industry made a point of coming to a con that I was at because we had sort of had a little bit of an interaction online, and he realized that we were like pretty much at exactly the same point in our careers in terms of hitting the bestsellers list around the same time, starting to deal with bigger contracts around the same time, starting to like, we both have a really good relationship with our agents. Like, we have different publishing houses, we write in different subgenres, all of the stuff. But he was like, I want you to be like my little peer on this journey together. And that was a decade ago, and we have been like pretty much best friends ever since. And we just met at a con, basically. In fact, I met a whole cadre of kind of best friends at that point in my career at that con, and literally 10 years later, we were all in the author bar at Worldcon in Dublin, and we were sitting in a little enclave in the corner, much as we had done a decade earlier. And I looked up at all of us, and I was like, "Oh, we're the old ones now. Like, we're the old ones in the corner, being like, when I was first getting published." But they're still the ones where I'm like, "Oh, this contract term, like, yes, I'll talk to my agent about it, but also I will call up my author friends and be like, do I knuckle under on this?" Like, and that's because we've gone through we've gone through film deals together, we've gone through adaptations together, we've gone through all of this stuff together. And so, but for me, those were in-person contacts that I made in the science fiction and fantasy world. I feel like authors who do Clarion and writers' workshops and that sort of thing, and authors who kind of belong to local chapters of writers groups or whatever, especially if you're early on in your career, that's kind of something you can do, is sort of go meet people. You can meet people in person. I agree, online as well, but there's definitely bifurcation in the self-publishing world in terms of like people who do rapid release, people who are in KU, people who are wide, that kind of thing. So you kind of have to know your strategy to make your friends in that world. And sometimes when you're first entering it, it can be really overwhelming. I don't know what to do. So I also advocate, I guess I would say, for in-person friends if you can do it.
Yeah, I like that advice too about someone on your level or above, because you can definitely push yourself a little more when you're like, oh, this person is really, going for it. I want to be there. And then you just keep climbing together, which is great.
Yes, it's great. It's great. I highly recommend. And like, unfortunately, you will also leave people behind or be left behind when somebody kind of ups to a new level or what have you. But that's kind of part of it. That's how kind of friendships work in general, in the business. If you think about it as sort of your water cooler business thing, whatever venue that takes, whether it's a critique group or a writer's group or writer chapter or whatever. I mean, I also belong to sort of a writer's group locally, for example, that's mostly newer authors or wannabe authors or authors who haven't been published yet. And I am a terrible mentor for that group because I don't really remember what it's like. And more importantly, like, I have too much knowledge. So like if they ask me a question, it's like this, I'll just like spit out, 13 years worth of publishing experience. And I'm like, oh, that is too much. And I can't really help a debut author make choices because I'm too removed from it in a way. And I also like don't know what it's like to be a debut author anymore. Like I don't know what the overwhelm points are or anything. But I try to be a resource. And that can also, like finding someone who's like a mentor or willing to be a mentor is pretty rare, but also finding sort of an old guard, trad published author or whatever kind of published author that's also kind of, like in a group or whatever, like they may be a little jaded, but you might be able to glean something from them.
When they've been orphaned too many times, they get a little jaded. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me. So where can we all find this awesome newsletter that we keep hearing about and everything else? Where can we find you?
The newsletter. This is the point where I say, apart from my one nonfiction book, all of my social media, my newsletter and everything is for my readers. So if you like my books, you will like my newsletter. There's nothing for authors though there, like unless you're interested in like my process, like what I'm writing, what I'm thinking of doing, me freaking out about being unable to upload a print book to Ingram, and me or seeing how I apologize to my reader base when I've messed up, for example, then certainly feel free to follow the newsletter. Or if you want tea recommendations and occasionally recipes, but it's really for my readers. That's what I recommend authors do though. So you should feel free to drop by, subscribe, take a look at how I do it. Like absolutely crib if you want. My newsletter is about 13,000 strong. My open rate's about 60% and my click-through is about 18% at last check. So I'm telling you that because those are good numbers, and it gives you an idea of what I'm after, which is quality over quantity. So I purge my newsletter regularly. And I'm saying this to you because if you're going to take advice on newsletter from anybody, you should ask for those bits of information before you adopt a newsletter guru. Also, you should subscribe to their newsletter and see if you enjoy it before you adopt a newsletter guru. But yes, please feel free to give mine a try, but just be aware that there's no writer's tips or anything like that. It's really for my readers. So there's silly stuff about octopi and my cat and the Victorian era and tea, and whatever book I have coming out. So that is all on my website. Everything's on my website. You can find anywhere I'm on social media, that's on my website. The only place I really talk about the business side of writing or the craft side of writing is on Twitter. But I am not on Twitter very often. However, my website does have a resources tab, and on that resources tab is a bunch of articles and links and things that I recommend for new authors. So that is probably your best bet. There's a section for like newer authors and then a section for more established authors. So for example, I have a whole little blog post I've done on using redirection for URLs via WordPress plugin, stuff like that, like stuff that people have just asked me about so often that I finally just did a blog post about it. So yeah, so there are resources for you on my website as well. So you should just check those out, and then I have a contact page on my website which will take you to wherever I am on social media if you'd like to interface with me there.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope it's useful. I hope something I said has been useful.